So, hey everybody, thanks for joining again. We have Ben and Diego here from Voiz Academy. We're going to be talking a little bit about the AMA, or talking a little bit about a Web3 refi sustainability course. And just for some starters, I'd love to hear about your background, Diego and Ben.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll take it first. So I have kind of a varied background. I started out actually, like, I was really into the environment and the planet when I was young, and I studied environmental engineering, thinking that that was kind of a way in. And then I quickly got sidetracked into finance. And so I went to Wharton and got an MBA in finance and went to strategy consulting. I worked for BCG, and then I had a career on Wall Street, and I managed $10 billion global equity fund, and also was a research analyst for Latin American stocks for a while, and then became a research director. So I hired and trained TradFi research analysts for stocks. And then I was on my own for a long time. Like I basically just managed my own assets. And when Web3 came along, I was I was looking into the healthcare sector and just like how horrific it was in the United States. And so I saw the potential for blockchain to do something about that. So I launched one of the early healthcare data on the blockchain projects called HealthCoin, and met Joe Lubin. He asked me to come into Consensus and basically like run the healthcare side for him. And so I did that for a while. And we actually did ship product. Like we created a decentralized protocol for storing not only health data, but also like all of your social media data, like all of your online data as a consumer. And so that was pretty cool. Crypto winter set in. So this is like my second crypto winter now. But like, so I've gotten to see, like, it's amazing. Like the first time I was there for the whole ICO craze, I swear there was like a 1 month window where we thought I was going to do $150 million ICO. And then like a month later, everything got shut down at Consensus. So it's been an interesting journey for me in that sense. Anyway, I'll let Ben go.
Yeah, it's far less exciting, I guess, my background.
No way.
So I graduated from university in July 2022. I did a degree in economics, law, and the environment. So very broad, but also kind of a lot of it environmental focused and environmental economics. And I actually joined Voiz Academy 2 years ago, pretty much to the day. I think I got my like 2-year recognition thing like 3 days ago. So I started very much on the TradFi side and helped build the kind of the ESG investing side of Voiz Academy. And then through doing a finance summit, we decided to spend a few days specifically focusing on Web3 and how Web3 is changing sustainable investing and how it can be used to help environmental and social causes. And that kind of really unlocked the Web3 space for me. And then since then, me and Diego we did a hackathon, which got people from kind of all over the world to help look at creating a ESG oriented index within the Web3 space, and then created the first cohort of the program that we're running, the second cohort of this year. So kind of very much TradFi side, but then moving into Web3 and basically figuring out how to best educate people interested in the space on how to look at the environmental and social good that can come out of decentralization in Web3, and also how to analyze that in a investment perspective. So that's my background.
Thanks, Ben and Diego. Thanks everyone for joining. Good to see you again, Spencer. Hi, Emily. Good to see some familiar faces. We're just talking a little bit about Web3 Sustainability Bootcamp put on by Voiz Academy. So just digging into the backgrounds, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the details behind the bootcamp and what to expect. For anyone that's here and doesn't really know what refi is, Diego or Ben, can you just give like a high level definition of refi or regenerative finance?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, refis could take off on DeFi, and there's a little bit of like a little bit of like in your face conflict in the sense of like DeFi degens were a thing and it was all about making money. And, I like to say Web3 is carried on the shoulders of speculators. So like it wouldn't have gone anywhere if it hadn't been for them. But it's not necessarily a crowd that cares so much about the planet. And so there's another segment within Web3, which really does a lot. And I think that was just a way of for them to label themselves and brand themselves. And so the whole thing is basically like refi and regens are about regenerative finance, and regenerative finance, the whole idea is that we can use finance as a positive force for good. And part of the way that we can do that is through using blockchain primitives to do things that traditional finance can't, that TradFi can't, like tokenizing carbon offsets and things like that. So there's a lot of experimentation and a lot of hope in that segment of the community. But I would say it's hard to put a number on it, but I would say that maybe, I don't know, like when I was at Consensus, I would say maybe 70% of the people there would consider that they really cared about the planet, and 30% were more like anarcho-capitalist, degens. And so it's wildly lopsided, I think, Web3 towards, in terms of like who's doing the work. But if you look at who's trying to make the money, it's probably the other way, right? So it's like 70-80% more like the degen side. And I'm not here to throw shade on anybody, like fine, people make money, that's awesome. There's just two different visions of Web3, and I think that's what's like in evidence with these two labels, basically.
Cool. That was some good background. It's always hard to explain refi, I feel, just because it's just like a play off DeFi, and people are just like, I don't know, I feel like more of a copycat, but thank you. Yeah, I like the explanation. So diving a little bit more into like the goal of the boot camp, we can just give like a high level summary of what students can expect, what can they expect to learn, what's kind of like, what does the curriculum look like, or what's like the week to week?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our program is really kind of interesting because, like, on a stealth basis, it's really an intro into decentralization. And I think that's really the coolest thing about it. So basically, the whole idea behind our Web3 Sustainability Analyst program is that the way that Web3 impacts the planet in a positive way, all roads lead through decentralization, right? So like, not to get too philosophical or economics theory based, but like, there are these coordination failures that plague society in almost every aspect of society that have to do with the excessive amount of centralization that we have in everything from education to finance to healthcare, Web2, social media platforms, you name it. And there's just this like, the last 30 years in human history has seen an extreme form of centralization where billions of people are linked to one central authority. It never happened before, right? And just like forget the last 30 years, the last 10 years, right? And so this has created all kinds of coordination failures, where as much as we want to, as humans, pull back from that and say like, this doesn't really make me happy, I'd rather see some different outcomes here or whatever, we can't quit it. Like we can't because we're worse off if we quit. And so we're stuck in like this massive centralization coordination failure that we call Moloch, which is a mythical creature. And there's like a very important kind of white paper in Web3, which you can go read. Gosh, I think it's called, I forget the name of it, but I have to dig it up when Ben talks. But it talks all about these coordination failures of Moloch. And so basically that's a long introduction, or a long way of saying that that's the subject of our course. How can we get rid of centralization coordination failures to make the planet better? How are projects doing that? And how do we evaluate projects on different dimensions for how good a job they're doing that? And so week to week, we're discussing basically how blockchain primitives combine to create decentralized architectures, and how those decentralized architectures create democratized access to resources, better, like direct impact on the planet and public goods, and then synergistic blockchain ecosystems, which create good. And so we basically look across those three dimensions, and we see how things are going. So I want to let Ben maybe talk a little bit about like some of the character of like the work that gets done. Because I think it's also like, we're super project based. Like I don't believe in teaching, I believe in learning, right? So learning happens when you do things, not when I blab away. So Ben's going to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. So kind of, yeah, getting into kind of the week to week of what we do. So the week will start with an online class that will be run by Diego. This will be asynchronous, and we'll cover kind of some of the core topics of our sustainability or our thesis for how decentralization can create positive impact on the planet or society. So then after this class, there'll be an assignment. So this can be very varied, but the main thing we look at is you'll be picking kind of a project or a token. It can be within some parameters, like for example, 1 week we may be really focusing, deep diving on, let's say, a refi token about the tokenization of carbon offsets. Or another week we may be looking at how different, for example, NFTs or NFT marketplaces can create access to different resources or impact different social interactions. So each week you'll be given these tokens or these parameters to research into. You would pick a token, and then you would follow a certain framework that we've kind of created over the last year to analyze them. And this comes under kind of 3 main topics. The first is the project design. How is the project designed to create positive environmental or social impact? This can be the specific kind of more technical analysis of a refi token, like how do these carbon credits in the TradFi market get tokenized? What is the background? How do they make sure that there's not double counting? How do they make sure they're authentic? How do they make sure they're kept like long term on the blockchain? And then the second of these main portions is the impact potential, because obviously if a project can't scale, its level of impact on the planet or society is very limited, whereas if you have a hugely scalable project, it can really create a lot of good. And then the third part here is the impact intentionality, and this looks at how intentional is the team behind the project on creating environmental or social good, because a project can be very decentralized and create a lot of good. But if the team's not entirely driven behind this kind of aspect of creating positive change, it could limit the potential future impact of that project. So you spend the week researching the token, writing with this framework that we provide to you. And then we have people called sustainability analyst leads. And this is someone like myself, or there's other people who've taken the program who will then help by giving you feedback. They'll look at your work and give you some tips or pointers. And then at the end of the week, we all come together with a full cohort, and then we talk about what we've learned, if anything we found is interesting, any difficulties. And that's where kind of the community aspect comes in, and we talk about the different things we found and collaborate in an online session to talk about the different research we've done. So that's kind of a common kind of weekly analysis of what we do. So a lot of it's kind of asynchronous study and work, basically very project-based, as Diego mentioned. And then we all come together to converse between the team about what we found.
That was awesome. Thanks for the summary. And if anyone has any questions or just general questions about refi, or I don't know, any interesting ideas, feel free to chime in and ask questions. You can pop your mic on or drop them in the chat. Supposed to be pretty engaging. Diving back into the questions, I know we just talked about kind of week to week. Who's your ideal student to sign up for the course? What kind of people are you looking for?
That's a good question. I think we've had a really good mix last summer when we launched our cohort. So we had people who were economics focused, people from computer science, and we had some philosophy majors. And it's a really good mix because and I'm going to share my screen on this. This is the white paper I was talking about. It's the Slate Star Codex Meditations on Moloch by Scott Alexander. And if you read this piece, you'll understand what I mean, that you want to know computer science, economics, and philosophy when you read this piece, and poetry. Right. So that's the cool part about Web3 is that you've got so many concepts thrown at you. And we discuss things in class, we'll look at traffic patrol people in India, that are at the traffic stops, substituting for traffic lights. And we'll discuss at what level of the system this is either decentralized or autonomous, and then compare that to traffic lights. And so we're abstracting away from everything in Web3 to try to really understand what decentralized and autonomous means, because 90% of the people in Web3 don't really understand what decentralized and autonomous means. And again, like I'm not throwing shade on them. It's just like, where do you go to learn this stuff? Right? Like, where do you practice like trying to look at things and say, that's decentralized, that's autonomous, over and over and over again, so that you really learn like that muscle memory to do it. So I feel like having people with like different skills in the room is the best way, because they all have like different ideas about like how to come at that. And so that's so we love a mix. I love to see computer science people in there because again, like some of the stuff that they do is also like, they're like really good at abstracting away from things, and when they have an opportunity to. And so I really like the way they think. And also we talked a lot about how the technology layer and the coordination layer interact. So what I mean by that is that we look at all the blockchain primitives and we say, like, how do you build something decentralized out of these primitives so that you can ultimately lead at the top of the stack to decentralized coordination? So at the bottom of the stack, you know, obviously we've got like silicon and like all that stuff, but then you've got like cryptography, which enables blockchain primitives. And then you can put them together in some kind of decentralized architecture like a DAO. But then at the very top of the stack, what you have is, in the use case, some kind of decentralized coordination behavior, right? And so looking at that whole stack and how that actually happens, it really helps to have some computer science people involved. But you don't need to know anything about that. All you need to do is have a mind that basically allows you to abstract away from things. And then we can have like some really, but then also zoom back in and say, like, this is the behavior that we're talking about, that we're trying to kind of architect and promote. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I think I sent the link for that paper in the chat. It looked like there's also like a few YouTube videos that might audiobook style it. Is there any other resources that you guys can like provide or drop in the chat just to prepare before taking the course, or any like anything to read, listen to, take a deeper look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's you know, the book Green Pilled, which I think this is from, is really good, but it talks a lot about these coordination failures and how blockchain primitives can be. I don't have the actual name of the book, but I think it's called Green Pilled. And so that's a great book to read. It's very kind of like heavily economics focused. So that's a good one. I think one of the things that we talk about is this idea of like, and again, this is a little bit philosophical, like, if we're going to solve the world's problems, we have three competing schools of thought within technology. One school of thought is techno-optimism, which, like, here's Mark Andreessen, and he's like, invest in the right technology and we'll solve all the world's problems. And of course that makes him kind of the savior of the world, right? Because he's choosing so like, yeah, that's cool the way that works. And so in Silicon Valley, you're going to find a lot of techno-optimism, and I've seen them on Twitter going like, I don't understand why Gen Z is so like pessimistic. This isn't helping, blah, blah, blah. Like, don't you understand technology is going to save the world? So it's like a very kind of, I don't know how clear-eyed the analysts are there and actually looking at what's happening. Cyberpunk is like, the world's going to shit and the clever hackers are going to be the ones that do really well. That's cool. Okay. I mean, if you're a computer science person, you're a clever hacker or a transhumanist or whatever, and you can look at any number of like in this genre of opportunities for like transhumanist hackers to kind of like do really well at the end of the world, or be the people who lead everyone forward. It's a vision. And the solarpunk vision is the third one. Solarpunk is basically like, we're going to use technology as humans in really imaginative and clever ways to save the world. And it's hopeful and optimistic, but at the same time, the punk part is like, we got to challenge the status quo. Things have to change. And so I think like philosophically grounding yourself in these genres and understanding what they mean and how they frame discussions about technology is actually like a really interesting thing to do. And so I think solarpunk is still underrated, even though it's gotten some play in the Web3 world. I think we're just beginning to understand like what this concept of solarpunk is and how it can provide an alternative vision philosophically for how we address the future using technology. And so everyone here on this call is like really interested in technology. Not everyone's sustainability is. I see a lot of people on my Twitter who are like, technology is the source of the problem. We just got to shut it down. And like, I don't think anyone here would probably agree with that. So if you don't agree with that, then the question is, what's your worldview? How are we actually going to get technology to do some good in the world? And so that's basically the frame for our whole course, is this kind of like solar punk frame, and how can we be regens? How can we basically take these primitives and build them into stuff that creates that fights coordination failures and fights this guy. So that's, I don't know, maybe I wandered off a little bit, but
no, it's super interesting. Like, I'm just curious, like from personal perspective, what are some of your favorite projects that you follow in like refi?
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I really loved KlimaDAO when it first came. Like when I first heard about KlimaDAO, I was like, let me back up a little bit. Carbon offsets in the sustainability community, they have a bad name. And so for those of you who don't know, it's basically the idea is you're a carbon polluter, and then you like help somebody finance some kind of forest somewhere, or stop them from cutting it down. And then you get to count that against your carbon emissions that you have. And the problem is, like, there's a ton of greenwashing and double counting, and it's like rife with corruption, the whole carbon offset market. And so when you talk to true believers in the sustainability market space, they're like, carbon offsets, don't talk to me about that. And so along comes Klima, and they're like, oh, we're going to like tokenize the whole carbon. So when I first heard about it, I was like, no, dude, that's not the answer. You know, the carbon offsets are not the answer. And then I looked deeper, and then I realized it's a game theoretic approach. So this is when we get into coordination failure. So the coordination failure is that carbon is too cheap, right? So what happens is, even if you, so like consuming carbon or emitting carbon, it's just so cheap to do that. And we've got to drive up the price so these people stop doing it, right? And so offsets are like super cheap, like $50 for a ton of carbon or something like that. And so you can offset like all of your carbon emissions if you're a big corporation for less than 1% of your sales. Like, that's never going to work because it's not for real. Like you intuitively know that to solve the climate crisis problem, it's going to cost more than 1% of sales, right? Like anybody would just be like, hey, wait a minute, 1%, like what about 5 or 10 or something like that? And so what KlimaDAO decided was, we're going to form a DAO that will basically, everyone kind of like in a sense coordinates, I don't want to say colludes, but coordinates to buy up and stake all of these carbon tokens. And by staking them, and so we're going to take over the whole carbon market, tokenize the whole thing. We're going to stake everything, which means we put it away on the shelf somewhere. And then there's no carbon offsets to be bought. And what that does is it drives up the price. And so now corporations are having to pay a ton of money for the carbon offsets, which means they're better off reducing their actual emissions than they are. And so way back when, like, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, these nefarious Hunt brothers from Texas tried to corner the silver market, and they almost did it. And but like the shorts kind of like beat them at it. It was kind of like the original Wall Street Bets kind of thing. And so they went bankrupt, blah, blah, blah. But it was like somebody trying to coordinate and capture a whole market. So KlimaDAO's idea was to do that. And it just didn't quite work. And so what happened was their token went to the moon, and then it crashed like 98% or whatever. It was a good try. Like, I love it. Like, we got to experiment in these ways. And so what I loved about the whole thing was like the creativity, the Wall Street Bets kind of attitude, that we're all going to coordinate and like change things and flip things so that things are completely different. So it's not gone away. It's still around. But like, I feel like what we learned about KlimaDAO is going to inform future projects. And we're really trying to use this game theoretic economic thinking to try to make markets work better and make behavior change, basically. So that's a good example of one.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like that's probably the biggest name out there in like refi, or like they had like the most, I guess, TVL at one point, and then all other little companies are either postponing token sales or have like fallen off the grid with the bear market.
Yeah,
unfortunately. But it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next like year in the bear market with all these, and what kind of, I don't know, like corporation or like government partnerships can be made.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff that we haven't yet tried. And like I was watching like a webinar or an AMA with somebody who was like a real OG from the regenerative ag space, spent the whole, older than me, spent the whole career in regenerative ag. And they were saying like the USDA, for those of you who are in the US, this is like the main agriculture agency, hates regenerative ag. Like, don't even ask me why, but like they just like they will go and they will teach you how to apply pesticides and nitrogen to your farm to make your farm more productive all day long. And if you ask them like, hey, wait a minute, how do I grow cover crops and basically like nurture the topsoil and regenerate it and the whole thing, like they have no idea and they don't even want you to ask, right? So the vast majority of farmers today have never had any kind of experience with it. It's very, very hard. And so like right there's a huge opportunity for a DAO where farmers can like band together and really kind of like teach each other about regenerative ag and how to get it to market and like the whole thing. And I'll tell you a little story about Mexico. Like I live in Mexico and I was driving to a little town because I got an appointment there to get a license. And it took a long time in the slightly larger town where I live. And the person driving me there was like, we were passing farms and I was like, oh, what are these farms all about? What are they like? And they were saying like, most of these farms are small. And they don't have actually enough money to buy pesticide and fertilizer, because like you need to borrow to do that, and they cost a lot of money, and especially if like Monsanto, and that's even illegal in Mexico. And so they're regenerative because they just don't have the money to finance their inputs. And so what happens is like they have to work incredibly hard to be regenerative, but then the larger farms that have access to borrowing capacity, they produce so much that they drive down the prices. And so at the end of the season, the regenerative farmers like, I just like, you know, worked my ass off to get this crop in the right way, but I'm barely able to make enough money to survive, right? And so it's like, what do you do about that? You know, we talk about regenerative ag like all the time. Regenerative ag's got to save the planet, like all of these things. But these people have no way to coordinate, no way to like change that system. And so that's where I think that like really clever people, cleverer than me, can try to get these people to band together and do whatever they need to do in order to kind of like change that, so that their better practices are actually the norm and they're not being like driven out of business by these very, very large agricultural producers, many of whom are going to be owned by private equity, right? Like that's crazy, right? Private equity owns these things. They become like really, really large. They do Monsanto, they do all this stuff. They put the little guys out of business, and then we end up with shit. And so how do we change that? And I just think like, I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know what the project is to point to, but I do know that's the hope, is that in the next kind of 10, 20, 50, whatever number of years, people that are really smart will figure that out and be able to use DAOs or whatever it is to change that situation.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was super insightful. Andrew has a question in the chat. He said, just on a whim, is large scale mass output regenerative ag possible, or does traditional farming pesticides win in terms of output?
See, I love that question. I love that question. And the reason I love that question is because I'm a clear-eyed analyst. Like at the end of the day, I'm a Wall Street guy. And so like whatever I look at, I want to see the hard reality of it. And regenerative ag has a lot of romanticism. And I appreciate it. People have to have hope and they want to believe in stuff. But like the romanticism doesn't do us any good. Like, look at this farm and it's like a half of an acre and there's amazing things are happening in this farm. But then there's like no idea of how the food system is going to change. And so I did some digging into this. And basically the issue is not so much that regenerative ag can't feed us. The problem is that it's just not as automated and productive as monoculture industrial ag. And so what it implies is that we can't just feed all of these people that live in cities with a very, very small number of people that live in rural areas. And so if regenerative ag is ever going to really, really scale, we need to get people to move from the cities into rural areas to engage in regenerative agriculture, like not just a little bit of people, a huge number of people, right? We built our system so that people living in cities depend on nitrogen and pesticides in rural areas. It's just the way it is. Now, what kind of a world is it where more people live in rural areas? Hey, maybe that's a pretty good world, right? It's just getting from point A to point B is really, really hard because we don't want to break our food system on the way there. So I think the answer to the question is like, not enough people are asking the question. Like we need to spend less time thinking about like, let me teach you regenerative ag and this is how cover crops work and blah, 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 blah. Sure, that's important. But like the much more important thing is how do we actually change our food system without breaking it? Because if we break it on the way there, we'll have famine. Not good. And so this is the problem with fragility in our human systems with 8 billion people in the world. And this is the problem with Moloch. I kind of like stayed on this slide. Maybe it was a coincidence or like, but like this is the problem with Moloch is we can't quit the system that Moloch has built. And so all our cleverness, all of our ingenuity has to go into challenging Moloch and not being kind of like distracted by romanticism that's like, let's talk all day long about these beautiful things, but we have no idea how they're supposed to happen. I think we're smarter than that as humans. We can do a better job than that.
Thanks. That was a good question. Diego, what are you kind of excited for this year? Or like what kind of, I know you touched on a few things that you're excited for in like 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know. Is there anything that gets you excited that you want to see like happen this year that you think might be possible or stretching?
I think that I'm a systems person. So like, I try to think about like how are narratives and systems going to change and what are the catalysts for them changing. The biggest thing that I'm excited about is not so much on the technology side, but more in labor. So I'm really excited about the statistic that Gen Z is going to be 27% of the workforce by 2025. I didn't know that when I first saw that stat. It's kind of crept up on us. Like Gen Z, like they used to be like younger millennials or like whatever. And now, 27% of the workforce by 2025. I think we have the possibility of achieving a tipping point, whereas they swamp the workforce. They're really, really going to turn to the internal dynamics of corporations. And the reason is because what they want is not that different than millennials. And I know it looks like it's a bit silly to talk about Gen Z millennials like that, but like, let's just stay with it. They want the same things that millennials do. They just have less skin in the game. They're more just kind of like, okay, I'm going to tell a story about Gen Z without naming them. They got like this fantastic job in a time when crypto was like really difficult, in a difficult state. And I talked to them and they were like, yeah, I got this job. I'm like, no way, you got that job. Like, that's an amazing job. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to negotiate the pay higher. And I'm like, are you insane? Like, how can you do that in the middle of like this crypto winter? And like, and that's like, for me, that kind of epitomizes the Gen Z attitude. It's like, yeah, like I need to make more money. I need to live. There's things cost a lot of money right now. And so there's less of like, no, that's not the way things are done. The way things are done like this. And COVID blew up all those norms. So I think that's one of the biggest differences between Gen Z and millennials is that Gen Z had to live with this thing where like, actually, most of what I hear is bullshit about the way things are supposed to happen because it's like so screwed up. And so I'm not going to sign up for that. So having like that, a level of kind of like outspokenness and change agentness come into corporations makes me really hopeful that corporations will start to have FOMO and be like, oh shit, we have to hire the best talent. We've got to adapt ourselves to this generation. Otherwise we'd be left behind. And you get this kind of FOMO race to change, to be able to adapt to them. And so my hope is that this is like an arms race, like a cultural arms race. Usually every generation comes in and gets normed out, right? They have to adapt to the norms of the workplace that they're going into. And that happens at a relatively fast clip. And so for me, the most important dynamic to be hopeful about is that they will outlast that norming out process. And they'll force the corporations into a race to adapt their norms to what they want. And there's a little bit of technology in this because like they'll carry within it the seed of Web3 and understanding that crypto can be a different thing and just intuitively knowing that. And I think that'll be fertile soil with it in which Web3 can really grow. I don't know if Gen Z in here like push back or tell me I'm stupid or whatever. I don't want to speak for a whole generation. This is just what I think I see happening.
I don't know if we have any Gen Zers in here, but
Ben is a Gen Z.
Yeah.
Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an exciting amount, especially with COVID, and not only the kind of the change in the workspace, but also the change in the understanding of how things can be coordinated. I mean, Web3 is kind of the prime example of this, how kind of the people working in the Web3 space, it's kind of online, it's a very like global community, and people are getting used to the ideas of working online and working for kind of goals aside from the more kind of the classic norm of getting a job to get a house and similar. And Web3 really opens up an international community, and also it's just all online. And since COVID and the idea of kind of moving out of the office, I think a lot is changing in the workspace, and especially as in kind of looking into and speaking to a lot of people who might have gone through past cohorts who work in the Web3 space. The idea of kind of the classic kind of in the office 9 to 5 is just quite alien to them. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of kind of catching up with people from past cohorts who are kind of maybe at Web3 sustainable VCs or in DAOs and similar, and they just really enjoy it, and going kind of comparing it to more traditional um like workspaces, it's just it's difficult to compare the experiences that people are having.
Yeah, I agree there. I also think it's interesting just on like the pay side. I know Diego, you kind of touched on that a little bit. I feel like over the last like 3 to 5 years, we've just seen an influx of like a shit ton of money coming into the market. Well, it's like with COVID wiping everything out, then everything, the stock market is going crazy. And then that's sending crypto into like a craze too. I feel like everyone just like saw all this money coming in, saw people getting paid hundreds of $1,000s, like way overpriced, in a market that wasn't sustainable. And now they're like, okay, I want my fair share. Like I didn't get rich during this. Now this is my time. So like I want to be paid in tokens and cash, right? So I think it's a very like, I feel like it's a kind of like a greedy atmosphere, because you saw like all these companies kind of go from like zero to billions of dollars, then back down to like, I don't know, putting people out of business or going bankrupt. And then you're just sitting here like, holy shit, like I just witnessed this whole thing happen and I didn't sell at the top. And now I'm like sitting here like, okay, more waiting, or I don't know, more like negotiating.
Yeah, and I think that also with the crypto world has to do with Gen Z and meme investing. It's basically like, look, I can't hope to try to build up the kind of capital that boomers did, so I might as well like speculate to try to get it. And I totally respect that. Like, I think that's a valid view, you
We've all been there, or at least I have.
know.
Hopefully other people have with me. I know we're coming up on something close to time. I think that's all the questions I had. Did anyone else have any final questions or?
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, I'm interested in this in the Web3 ESG analyst thing, but the only thing is like I'm super busy right now. So I was just wondering like time commitment and timing, because like I work 10 to 6 and like EST, and I was wondering like, so I came a little late, so I don't know if you guys mentioned stuff like that already. So that was kind of my question I wanted to get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so we kind of have like asynchronous video to build up like some concepts, and you can watch that on 2x. I don't mind. And so like that I do it with captions. I can't watch 2x like without the captions. So that can be pretty efficient. And then like the main area of work is just to look at a project, and from week to week you're either ranking them or you're analyzing them for their, like Ben said, like their impact potential and their scalability and their intentionality. And I would say like it's just as much time as you have to put into it. And some people can work like really fast and research really fast and figure things out, and other people want to spend more time on it. But for me, the most important thing is like when you do these things, you just learn like really fast, because you it's just like a perspective. It's like, I'm going to analyze this project in this way. And as soon as you start doing it, you see things like, oh, wow, I noticed this and I noticed this and I noticed this. So maybe you won't do like the most complete job of it. But I don't like, that doesn't actually matter to me. What matters to me is like you ask yourself questions and you learn because of those questions. And so I think that's how you get, like, my goal is not for everybody to, produce perfect work. My goal is for everyone to walk away having something that they will be able to use forever, like not some knowledge that they might forget the next day. So that's the goal. So all of that said, I think it's probably at least something like 4 hours a week or 5 hours a week. Yeah.
Okay. I'll yeah, just cause like I said, and then also I don't know if you can tell, I'm like doing research right now for like I'm actually looking at soils, which is kind of cool. Like I'm doing research on like mycorrhizal fungi within soils. So
Very cool.
like that takes up my time in the free time. So that was the only thing I was wondering. So yeah,
And just so you know, we've had a couple of virologists. I see a microphone, a microscope behind you, and we've had a couple of PhD virologists from Cambridge in our
nice.
programs, and like they were just like so into like these viruses or whatever they were doing all that like 24/7 that they wanted to break, and so they took the programs, and they really loved it. So anyway,
All right, I'll yeah, I'll definitely think about that. Sure.
Cool. I can connect you to Ben after this, Spencer, too, if you have any follow-up questions. Cool. I think that's all I had. Is there anything like last little word you want to put out there, Diego or Ben?
just, you know, shameless advertising, Voiz.academy, and that's where you can find, if you go to programs, you'll find the Web3 Sustainability Analyst program. And you basically apply, we get right back to you, have an interview, just because we want to meet everyone who's coming into our community. And it's a relatively short process. And so hope to see you in the next cohort.
Cool. Oh, Andrew, question.
Just a super quick question. I went to the Voiz Academy program application. There's a couple of different types of analysts. Is there one that in particular one was to apply to ESG or?
Yeah, it's called the Web3 SA or Web3 Sustainability Analyst program. That's the one. It's on the application form. There's a menu, and that's what you apply. Sure.
Cool. If are you in the Discord, Andrew? You can just shake your head. I know you're.
No, I'm not. I'm brand new actually, so this has been an awesome call so far.
Let me send you our Discord channel, and I'll send you I'll send everything after that in the Discord so you can have it.
My roommates are a little bit loud, apologies, but thank you.
Yeah. All right. Then I'll be sending a little recap there, and I'll send all the links over, and the recording of this if you want anything to refer to. But thanks again, Diego and Ben. This was super awesome. I learned a lot actually. I'm actually probably green pilled. So yeah, thanks again for coming in. And we'll definitely send over some people to potentially take the boot camp. So would love to stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, guys. Really nice to meet you.